I'd just like to read a couple of quotes from David Longy's Bruce Jesson lecture, which have influenced my thinking, and this isn't the only document I've looked at, but David Longy, obviously not a paragon of the far right. So I'm just going to read two short quotes. First one is, democratic government can accommodate Māori political aspiration in many ways. It can allocate resources in ways which reflect the particular interests of Māori people. It can delegate authority and allow the exercise of degrees of Māori autonomy. What it cannot do is acknowledge the existence of a separate sovereignty. As soon as it does that, it isn't a democracy. We can have a democratic form of government, or we can have Indigenous sovereignty. They can't coexist, and we can't have them both. And the second one is, here I come to the dangers posed by the increasing entrenchment of the treaty and statute. The treaty itself contains no principles which can usefully guide government or courts. It is a bald agreement anchored in its time and place, and the public interest in it is the same as the public interest in enforcing any properly made agreement. To go further than that is to acknowledge the existence of undemocratic forms of rights, entitlements, or sovereignty. Now, that doesn't mean we don't need to have a dialogue. That doesn't mean that the treaty articles should not be honoured. That doesn't mean that that wrongs shouldn't be made right. But it does mean that we need to proceed very carefully, because the way this has been handled in New Zealand so far has really generated a lot of negative publicity about our country, and that's bad for everyone.
Thank you, Kendall. We'll go to Steve.
Kia ora. Thank you, Kendall. I actually attended that David Longy speech in 2000. It was very disappointing at the time, I can say. The thing I wanted to say was, you recognise that in the process of colonisation, that the atrocities committed, the loss of land, the attempts at assimilation and denial of Māori rights and denial of sovereignty are all part of a long history and tradition of colonisation, which is founded in a principle of white supremacy, really. So those kind of tropes of colonisation are inherently racist. And so when we encounter modern day expressions of those tropes, the desire to assimilate, to deny Māori their self-determination or their sovereignty, is it not reasonable and correct that we should point out what underpins a desire to do that to an Indigenous group of people, that it is founded in ideas of white supremacy or racism? No, I don't. I don't agree with that. I mean, are you suggesting that David Longy was a racist? No, I'm not, but I'm suggesting that there's a difference between the individual being a racist, and it's not very useful to focus on that, and understanding that the structural concepts that underpin certain things that are being done are coming from a place of racism as a kind of a framework for seeing the world. I don't see how that is a helpful framework for solving the problems we have in New Zealand at the moment. If you just want to focus on grievance, I appreciate that wrongs were done to Māori. I fully acknowledge that. I'm trying to clarify whether you acknowledge that those wrongs were done from a place of racism. Do you acknowledge that there was racism in the colonial actions, if not today, in the past? I think all sorts of things were going on, some of which were racism, some of which are probably just stupidity or greed. But I don't know how that helps us now. Okay, and forcing everything through this lens, I think, is counterproductive.
Thank you, Kendall.